When and where did you start your social work practice?
Okay, that's a good question. I'd have to answer that in a couple of different ways. First of all, my entry into the field was somewhat unconventional I guess in a way, even for the time, because I got involved in youth work through the YMCA, and also through the scouting movement, which these were common directions at the time. And so I became involved as a youth worker, but then I continued my education, postgraduate education, and I began teaching at the Carleton University School of Social Work, but not in those areas, but in an entirely different area in public policy and in economics. So I was really hired to teach background courses to people who would be working in the field. And during my time as a university teacher, my practice, such as it was, evolved into a practice in public policy. So I began intervening in different public inquiries, and eventually I was hired on a secondment. I was hired by the City of Ottawa as Director of Research in the Social Services Department, and from there I was hired by the province as a Chief Advisor on the reform of the Ontario welfare system. So I started small and ended up as the chair of a large-scale public policy process in the province of Ontario.
What drew you to the profession?
Well, I was studying in economics, and I always had an interest, as I said, from my own youth and early adult years in youth work. But what I found in economics, which interested me, was a pretty mainstream, very conventional approach, which really didn't accommodate my interests in social justice issues. And so I was looking for a place that would allow me to do both and remain in the university, and I found that social work was a really nice fit, especially the way in which some of the university social work programs were starting to evolve into a program in social policy and in social administration, which is really where my interest lay.
What was your primary area of practice?
Well, I've already touched on that. My primary area of practice has been in social policy and in social administration. Apart from my own private interventions in, for example, in House of Commons consultations. I also did work for Royal Commissions, doing background studies for Royal Commissions. And as a result of the secondment that I took, I became involved much more in issues of implementation. What I learned from that experience was about the complexity of administering a good idea, of actually laying out the parameters of implementing a program, taking it from the idea stage into legislation, and from legislation into the regulations, and from regulations into an actual policy manual. And I've tried since that time to bring that into the teaching that I do in the university, emphasizing to students who perhaps had no direct interest in policy or administration that they work in a regime in which the rules and regulations and the policy manuals are the framework within which they operate, and they need to actually understand that if they're going to advise a client, or if they're going to simply work within the field in a variety of capacities. So I certainly learned a lot about implementation. So my primary areas have been policy and in social policy, but also in the implementation of social policy, or as it's sometimes referred to, social administration.
What was it like to practice in the years prior to the professionalization of social work?
So when you're talking about professionalization, I think you're talking about in Ontario at least, the development of legislation, the development of the college. Okay. For me personally, the legislation and the development of the college didn't change anything at all. I understand how it has changed. It's changed the way in which people work in some corners of the field, some parts of the field where it was quite important. You may not be aware of this, but I actually had a very direct and close involvement in the development of the legislation, even of the college, of the professional legislation, and not so much the college itself, but in the legislation, even though it didn't mean, it wasn't going to mean very much for me. I understood that it would mean something for the field, and so I was at the time the chair of the Ontario Deans and Directors of Schools of Social Work, and in that capacity wrote a couple of briefs on behalf of the Schools of Social Work, and had a close involvement with the staff who were developing the legislation, so that at least some of the innovations that I put into the brief and represented on behalf of the deans and directors became part of the legislation. And I like to think that at least some of the compromises which we put in there, which came about because of discussions, for example, with the community college programs and with people who were critical of legislation entirely. The work that we did brought the different interests in the field together to focus on a piece of legislation that would more or less satisfy everybody. Of course, the other way of looking at it is to say it satisfied nobody, but I think it actually did satisfy most people in that process.
Is there a contribution or accomplishment you're particularly proud of?
Well, I'm proud of some of the pieces that I've contributed for what they contributed at the time. I have to say I can't think of anything of that in my professional capacity that has carried more than to contribute to the field. But I think in the university, I think one of the things I'm very proud of is the fact that during my time as a director of the School of Social Work at Carleton University, it was under extreme pressure to survive, and I guess one of my major accomplishments was helping it not only to survive but to prosper in the years that followed that period of time in the 1990s when it was under such extreme pressure. And we not only survived, but we redeveloped both the undergraduate and the graduate program, and those two programs have run very successfully for the past 20 years. And I also set the groundwork for the development of the PhD program, which was then picked up by my colleagues subsequently, and we now have a functioning doctoral program as well. So I guess I'd say that was biggest accomplishment.
Given what you know now, is there anything you would do differently in your career if you could go back in time?
Do differently. You know, I tried in what I did to strike a balance between teaching and research and the academy and my work on the outside, because I always felt that in working in the profession, I should have an active involvement in the profession. It's difficult to be in the classroom and to teach about issues that are really a part of employment in many ways, and not have the at least some experience of recent employment to be able to say, well, I've reflected on this not only from my research, but also from my personal experience. So I've tried to strike that balance between the two. And sometimes that's meant having to put in extra hours because you feel like you're doing two different things simultaneously, working in the university, but also trying to keep up actively outside, whether it's community work or whether it's sometimes taking a secondment or working with a government body. But no, I don't think I do it differently. Sometimes I wish that I would have done things a little bit more serially. That is to say, do one thing and then another, and not try to to be two or three people at the same time, which can be very stressful at times.
What were some of the challenges or barriers you worked to overcome, and who, if anyone, was your ally?
Well, I had a lot of mentors at the beginning, certainly at the beginning of my career, and I really appreciate the contributions that they made to making my career possible. But I think I think so many people have contributed in different ways. And when you're in this field, I think you're learning all the time. And I learned so much from so many students, as well as from faculty members and from people who were working full time in the field. But when I think about the challenges of getting used to working in the university environment and not being a student any longer, I think of the folks who were there at the outset and who really helped me a lot to learn how to work in that environment. People like Jim Albert, who hired me, and Peter Finley, who was at the door when I arrived, and who taught me a lot about the politics of the institution. And also Peter had this capacity for writing flawless bureaucratic memos, which I learned. I learned from him how you do that. Try to express what you're trying to get at without offending everybody in the process. So I had some really excellent mentors. The other person I think of is Glenn Drover, who had just an enormous amount of energy and enthusiasm for everything he did, and he taught me a lot just because he was so energetic.
What words of wisdom would you like to share with today's social workers?
I'm not sure I've acquired all that much wisdom. I think that I think we've been through a long period of austerity, a period characterized by governments at all levels that have been run by people obsessed with much less with providing good service and providing public service, and obsessed much more with how can we contain costs, which translated means how can we ensure that people who are wealthy keep more of their money in their pocket and don't contribute to the public good. And and really they have promoted the idea that public service is somehow not a good thing, and greed is a much better thing. Greed is a virtue, and public service is somehow a vice. I have the sense that we're starting now, after so many years, to come out of that period, and now there will be maybe an opportunity. And I hope the next generation of people will take advantage of that and see that there's a challenge in developing new programs and new ideas to match the new demographics of Canada in the 21st century.